Welcome back to the next episode of the eCom Growth Show. My name's Danan Coleman. I am your host, and with me, I've got a couple of very interesting people, and we've got a very interesting topic. It's not just AI, it's how AI is going to affect not just brands, but agencies. So with me, I've got Simon Ellicott. He is on the other side of the planet from us, kind of, sort of. He's really across a lake, a large lake. And then I've got Chris Fryburger, and both of them are, I'll let you guys introduce yourselves one at a time, but they basically are both consultants of agencies and companies in the Amazon space, not just in the Amazon space, but anyhow. Where are my manners? Please, Simon from England, please introduce yourself, and then Chris will have you introduce you.
Well, firstly, thank you for having me, Dana. As I say, I'm Simon Ellicott. I've been in the Amazon space for about 15 years now. For the last 7 or 8 years, it's been in leadership roles in the more prominent UK agencies. As of March this year, I've set up my own agency to help other agencies grow. So I'm now engaging with a broad spectrum of agencies. So have a good understanding of how they're being impacted by AI.
Awesome. And Chris, give us a bit of your history and who you are.
Yeah, thanks. I've been working with ad agencies for about 30 years now. I go back to being a first employee at an agency, have owned my own agency, sold as well. But about 5 years ago, I realized that some of the brands I was working with been on their second or third Amazon agency. And so I dived into the space to really vet them out. I track these agencies and really help them at all stages of growth, but moreover, really focus on preparatory and then finding an exit through an M&A process. To the current events and things like that, there's a lot of activity in that space and primarily what I focus on.
That's all, huh? Okay, cool. Just 30 years experience and then help people change lives. Okay, cool. Both of you, actually. Well, cool. I would say on behalf of the brands out there, I think I can preemptively thank you for your guys' taking your experience to help agencies, because with my own recent experience, so Simon, you're from March, I'm from January. We're both bootstrapping our companies. It's not lost on me how much more there is to know about running a business, not just running it, but running it cleanly with good books and good administrative processes and optimized, all that stuff. So let's dive into, so thank you for that. And let's dive into our questions. I'm going to try to keep this around the 30-minute mark-ish, but if the conversation's great, let's just roll with it. Cool. All right, question number 1. And I think what I'll do on this one, Simon, I'd like to get Chris, I want to get your opinion. And then Simon, I'd like to get yours. So where do you think AI is going and how does it affect our businesses? Chris.
Where to start? There's a short answer to that and a long answer. The short answer is that AI is going to, in the respective agencies, is going to help a lot to reduce costs. It's going to provide new capabilities and the areas of things like creative en masse and optimization and things along those lines. But ultimately, it's going to be a race, if you will, to maybe to the proverbial bottom in the next 5 years, in the sense that the pressures are going to change what an agency looks like in composite of, everything from employees to margins and things along those lines. So it's both a threat and an opportunity, maybe in reverse order.
Okay, so you think it's a short-term opportunity and a long-term threat?
Yes, I believe, again, through some of the pressures of within the next, we put a timer on it of 5 years. That's through the current economic environment and some of the projections on what the effect of AI will be. But we put a timer about 5 years. So we're looking at that window and what the opportunities will be in that time frame, as well as, the threats.
Okay. Simon, I'll ask you the same question. I'll just restate it. Where do you think AI is going and how does it affect our businesses?
Well, that's a broad spanning question. I'm largely in agreement with Chris. I think there's an evolution coming. I don't think it's necessarily happening at the rate that Chris is projecting. I think there's a lot of anxiety that's kind of emanated from the recent Prosper show that's things up a little. But to expand on, I think there's going to be a sequence, really. I think the next phase is kind of one of prosperity for agencies who are going to basically utilize AI for efficiencies, draw down their costs while still maintaining a high retainer. But then it will move into a phase of, acceptance that some of the services that we offer aren't of the perceived value that they are now. So there'll be a reduction in those and the expectations. Maybe, though, we might even weave some of those services into existing retainers. and then services will evolve. So it's a bit of a bell curve, and it's interesting to see where things are going.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Okay, so ultimately, it sounds like we're talking about the cycle of life and death here, of which pretty much everything in the universe has in some way or another. So, all right, I guess technically, scientifically, that's nothing new. But I lean more towards the side of Simon in that I actually think that the span of prosperity is going to be a bit longer, but I also think that it's going to eliminate some businesses in their entirety.
Mhm.
And I think it's going to be more along the lines of kind of separating the wheat from the chaff, so to speak. The fly by night, flash of the pan agencies are going to go bye bye because they can no longer offer their services at a price that makes sense because I think the brand would just take those things on themselves. But the larger agencies that offer full service solutions and a level of technology and data acquisition and interpretation far beyond what your normal seller is capable of producing, I believe that they will continue to exist and they will simply augment their services, just pivot to work with the times. Because I I keep saying this, and I am an example of my own statement. You either evolve with the future or die in the past. So, all right. Yes. Any other opinions?
If
Yeah.
I may,
Of course.
I think the question here is it's a matter of time, right? If we're focused on the end game and where agencies will end up, and we can disagree as to whether it's 5 or 10 years. I've recently converted to more of a shorter time frame through some research I've done and the Prosper Show and having spoken with owners and the like. I'm seeing the technology in the space, which is a very forward-looking space because we're all struggling with Amazon. We've got to be very, adjust quickly and the like. And so the technologies, the tools that are used are very cutting edge. And so I think it's a very good bubble to focus on versus maybe traditional agencies see the effect of AI coming on. But ultimately, what the answer is going to be, and I think all predictions, and I think everybody can agree, it's basically going to be a one person plus AI agency at that point. All of the aspects, and we can drill into any particular one where this is going to be affected first. But in the end, it's going to be what AI do I have versus the other guy. And ultimately, I think it's going to get to more of a performance-based billing than
Yeah.
say by service or hourly an employee, if you will, because again, I think all of that is going away. But not to focus on the end game doom stuff. There's a lot of things that's going to happen underneath that curve.
Yeah.
But I think that's ultimately what we need to talk about.
Yeah. Cool. Simon, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I tend to agree that it's going that way. I don't know if we'll ever get to one man plus an AI solution. I think it'll evolve into an operating system that's distinct between different agencies and becomes a USP. And that's on a journey towards that kind of ultimate AI solution. There'll also be a kind of a greater breadth of services that are incorporated into it. So there might be sort of a vendor negotiations, JBP negotiations, things that can't be replicated so easily with AI. I think the agencies and services that are most exposed right now are those that are easy to replicate. We've seen the advances with AI in terms of creative content. I think they're two of the services that will be called into question. So sooner rather than later, it's what replaces those services going forward, and that's the interesting thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Awesome. All right, cool. Well, thank you, gentlemen. I agree with both of you in part and in not in parts. So, all right, let's go on to the next question here. What components of full service agencies are going to be most exposed and affected by AI tools? And I'd like you guys, I'm going to be quiet on this. You guys just riff.
Well, I think leading on to the last question, shall I just kick off with this, Chris? I mean, it's the services that currently have quite a high value, like asset creation, like copywriting, that could just be now replicated or deployed instantaneously by AI. There'll come a point now where you can have just AI just updating your content on seasonal events, Amazon events, that you're always going to have optimized AI for that moment in time that you can't currently do with an agency or with creative agency. It will cost a lot of money. But now it's going to be virtually free. So I think that's the first evolution of the kind of bell curve.
So creative. Chris?
Yeah, I think you're seeing it already. The creative has a great big X through it right now. Again, you can look at it as an opportunity. If you don't have a creative shop, you can now do it not only creative, great creative, really, with a human directing and a human, maybe with strategy and double checking that for now. Again, maybe not going forward, but also what I would term as bulk creative, which is necessary for e-commerce. I got to
Right.
treat 1,000 ASINs for A+ content or 2-minute videos. You can now have that ability at a fraction of the cost and a fraction of the time. So an advantage, but ultimately a race to the bottom because everybody else can have that same capability. Creative being one bucket. I would also throw in there things like media buying and optimization. Again, a lot of the tools that you see there, or their implementation of AI is focused entirely on the spend and optimizing it. I think though the human will be, if not already, is all currently being augmented by AI, but ultimately will be replaced, I think, as well. Things like analytics and reporting, again, low hanging fruit that you see in the software tools out there. But really, when you start to get into some of the soft stuff, I think it's the stuff that's going to happen. That's going to happen less quickly, I guess. So we think about campaign, like things like campaign strategy and planning. Ultimately, one of the things AI is not good is doing is generating ideas, and I think that will come from humans for the foreseeable future. And then, kind of lastly, things like account management, client management. These are front-facing people. This is human-facing roles that are critically important to making sure the clients are happy, brands are on track. And I think, human will always be in that role, I think. So maybe it's not one person in AI, maybe it's 3 people, or, including an account manager ultimately that survives that. But I think that's kind of the pecking order I see as, AI replaces these roles.
To add to that, and also, yeah. I see. Adding to that, I mean, only this week, Amazon released its own kind of performance metrics, week on week. That's agentic AI generated. That's great in telling you kind of how you're performing. The next stage is going to see what are the root causes for any deviance. So now it'll go back and start addressing those root causes automatically. So it's going to be much more efficient. So every agency is going to have to know how best to deal with Amazon's AI as well as their own.
Yeah. Look, a lot of agencies today are built upon the data that you can download through the SP API, right? So the best agencies that survive are going to be the ones that are the smartest with using the data that's available and the computing and processing power that can be applied to that data. So I could see a day soon. Ooh, maybe I should build this now that I think about it. But I see a day where you have through the SP API, you just pull the data in and it just runs into a bot, a dashboard, Helium 10, Jungle Scouts, managed by stats. Oh, what's the other big one? They're based out of Europe.
Ecometrics there's a lot of them.
Yeah, well, yeah, you're right. There's a lot. So I think the day is going to come where you're just going to ask questions about your metrics. What's my profit? You're going to have to feed some information for sure, but you're just going to start asking questions. You're going to have a general board in which you look at the health of your organization, but then you're going to be asking specifics, or maybe it's making recommendations. Some of that's already happening now, but as more data becomes available and as someone builds a dedicated LLM for Amazon sellers where there are certain rules, like if this, then the result will be that, and this is how you arrest that decline, right? So
Yeah.
and it's going to be able to make smart predictions, smart recommendations, or you're going to be able to ask questions. Hey, I've run out of budget. What should I do?
Sure.
This is the operating system I was referring to. I mean, and there's also the barrier to entry no longer exists, which was cost. You need developers to build SaaS tools. Now agencies can only build their own. And so they'll be reliant on existing SaaS providers for the short term, but they're looking to bring that in-house. Proprietary technology and data is going to differentiate them from their partner.
Yep. Chris?
I mean, I think if I may, I think that these are the things that you see happening now, if you will, the low-hanging fruit, data being a target, but ultimately it's about the actual doing, the actual placement, the hooks into Amazon to actually do the change in price or replace the content, or not only flagging the opportunities, but actually doing it. And I think that's going to be the transformative thing for these. That's start replacing employees. That's going to be the ones that are fixing it, doing A/B testing within milliseconds where you can't do it now. These are all the human roles that will be replaced. Ultimately. So again, there's a bell curve. Opportunity you see, to scale and new capabilities, but ultimately it's going to affect the actual structure of the agency.
Yep, and it's A/B testing, but day parting. You can test different points of the day, maybe geographically. There'll be ways of increasing efficiency and conversion, but that's just simply not available now, but it's only around the corner.
Yeah, day parting is something that I don't know if a lot of sellers, especially the newer sellers, are even aware of what that is and how you might implement it. But when I was at Managed by Stats, we had day parting for ads, and you could see based on so you could filter two different ways: your historical sales bell curve or Amazon's general sales bell curve based on a ton of data, right? And so I used to suggest to people, and I'm no ads expert, but I used to suggest to them, hey, during peak times when you're making your sales anyhow and your conversion rate's really high, maybe keep your bids at just wherever they at point A, right? But as the sales go down, it's going down for everyone. So maybe you spend a little bit more on ads and grab that number one spot, number two spot, but it costs you less because there's less clicks at that time, but you have a higher conversion rate because you're being seen more. And so nobody would have that data unless somebody could interpret that.
Yeah.
So, LLMs and the amount of data processing that has to be done in order to be able to streamline solutions like that can only be done with AI or enormous amounts, if not AI, enormous amounts of like zaps from Zapier and stuff like that to get you what you need,
What if you apply the same thing to PD pages? I mean, what if basically someone who's basically searching during their working day, but will respond to a certain image, but in the evening, when they're actually going to go around to making that purchase, will respond or convert higher to a different sort of image? Getting that data as well is going to increase conversions and be much more accessible, with the the power of LLM.
Agreed. All right. That moves us on to our next question. And let's see. Well, Chris, you sort of answered this, but I'm going to go ahead and give this to you first. What's the time frame of when things will be affected, and when will we see sections of businesses start to erode due to implementation of AI? So I think the second part of that question is actually more what the listeners are going to be interested in, which is my mom, by the way. Hi, Mom. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, ultimately, that's also what I'm focused on, being in the M&A sector. What are the value of these agencies? It ultimately gets to, what does your team look like? What tools do you have in place? Ultimately, it gets to margins and scalability and things like that. So my orientation is, what are those agencies going to look like in the near future due to AI? And so it comes across a little bit pessimistic, but it's really more and less about capabilities, but more about like what is ultimately going to be the value of these entities, right? And so the question is time frame, right? I believe, just because of the acceleration in AI, I think it's really, obviously it's in infancy, but if you can look at if you know about the space and its capabilities in all of these areas, you can see it's going to stick. And so I believe that, and a number of solutions and that are solving for all aspects, again, not just the hard aspects of reporting and media placement, but the soft aspects of people's jobs, of doing task management, of reacting, of accounting, of legal aspects, and even if you can look at things like personal assistants, where it's predicted that everybody's going to have a personal assistant. I already rely on ChatGPT for a number of things and advice of my life and things like that. But everybody's going to have potentially an assistant that's going to be sitting alongside them in their workplace. I can do everything that they do for the most part. Responding to particular flags and triggers and things like that, but doing it while that employee sleeps, training that employee on new processes, recording what they're doing, and really making them scale. And so it's those soft things, those humans, that are going to also start to be affected in that 5-year. I think it's going to be a 5-year time frame, from just looking at all of the technology, not just in this space, but just the outside world, on how others are predicting it's going to affect employment.
And I think the thing that might slow that down is looking for a slightly different lens. It's the brands themselves, the ones who are using the agencies. And there's a spectrum of brands and a spectrum of why they would use a different agency. So the smaller native Amazon agents and brands would typically be the ones that may use in-house quite quickly. But the bigger brands who have also themselves got multiple touch points where AI is affecting their businesses, that they're focusing on that. And if they've got an Amazon agency, they would rather that they be the expert and make sure they're at the vanguard of what good AI looks like and so its growth. And I think so those are the agencies that will retain, so those are the brands that will retain the agency for longer. but their roles will evolve. They'll become like strategic partners. They'll educate the team internally as to kind of what's happening within that facet of the business and enable them to communicate up to the leadership team, which will become an increasingly important role in kind of how we're evolving. So I think there's two different ends of the spectrum, I think. And I think the bigger brands, the blue chip brands, will probably keep agencies going longer than, say, the smaller brands who might decide this is something they can do on their own.
Yeah. We've already named our... Go ahead, Chris.
I was going to push back again, though. We're going to go back and forth here because
Okay, go for it. Yeah.
He's pushing on my time frame. I'm going to push back. So
yeah.
I think we're ultimately saying the same thing. They are going to be strategic partners, not only in just like how to, represent the brand and storytelling and all the creative stuff that we love agencies for, branding and so on and so forth. Absolutely, that the human aspects, I think, are the advantage to humans over the bots. But ultimately, we're looking at like, okay, well, there's a strategic partner, but it's those three people and the best AI that ultimately comes down to sales, right? And ultimately to maximize those sales, you're going to need to be heavily automated and heavily AI to compete.
And retention, sales and retention.
Yeah, no, all of the aspects, any aspect of you dealing with AI or Amazon's going to require that to outperform, say, another agency, right? Or my internal agency or so on. So yeah, I don't want to dismiss it. The strategic aspect and the fun stuff, if you will, the creative stuff is always going to be human oriented, I think. But it ultimately is going to be like, okay, well, I need to place this campaign. I hit a button and, go. And so yes, you still need that agency, but that agency inside of it is not going to look at all the same.
No, and on that I agree. I think because the role of service, let's say the breadth of service is going to move into operations, it's going to move into kind of consultancy around negotiation, especially on the 1P side. So what we think of what full service right now will be very different in a few years' time. And it's those kind of top tier strategists within the business that can actually help the things that AI can't replicate. That's the way it's going to evolve. And I think that's how the bigger agencies are going to maintain their retainers and their fees.
Yep. And just to clarify, when I say the death of agencies, right, or people refer it that way, they're referring to really. Well, Forbes just did an article. Ad Age just did an article of asking that same question, and I think what they're saying is it's the death of 5 people around a table coming up with creative ideas, determining who the target is, and and things along all the stuff that an agency is an agency for is ultimately derives to the creative and on that team that used to get around a table and XYZ, and I think. That when I sort of refer to the death of an agency, the death of the agency will exist, hopefully, if they adapt and they implement the stuff and they do the area of the curve correctly, to Simon's point. But ultimately, I would not want to be an ACD at a creative agency right now. For instance, those are the folks that I love. I love copywriters. I love they're some of the best things, interactions in this entire agency space I've ever had. Are those are the people that make it all worth it, if you will. But they're also have their time is ticking, and I think it's more like 5 years in that respect.
Yeah,
kind of what I'm addressing.
And I think those are the ones that are slowest to adapt. So they're the ones currently servicing, let's say, a native Amazon brands who are built around SOPs and offshoring talent with a very rigid way of working because they want to keep costs down. They're going to fall by the wayside unless they adapt. And I think, much to your point, I think those would be delivering the same services now as they expect to in 5 years' time just won't exist.
All right, let me propose something here. So AI is only as good as the data it's been trained on. So I'm going to predict something else here, and that is that you're going to start seeing a lot of vanilla data, images, content, etc., because the reproduction of what comes out of AI is only as good as the data that's been trained on. So for instance, if you want, and feel free to do this right now, if you ask AI, and I'm going to do this live with you guys. I'm not going to share my screen, but if you ask AI, make me a picture of a wristwatch displaying 25 p.m., 6:25, wristwatch, doesn't matter whether it's AM or PM.
Every AI watch say 6:25 in the kind of image creation. I think it's something with it.
Let's see. It's not impossible that that's been fixed, but historically, the watches would show 10:10. Because if you look at high-end advertisements, that's the most pleasing to the eye time to see because the hands are proportionately apart in a pie on the dial, right? And so that time is most often used. I think it's 10:10. is most often used in advertisements. So AI, or ChatGPT in this case, having loads and loads of images to look at, went, oh, cool. See the picture of watch displaying time, and it would only give you 10:10. So I believe we're going to have the same issue with the data that is coming out from, I don't have access to the image. That's weird. Okay.
I guess the bigger question, Dane, is whether brands are happy with that, a kind of a 90% sort of perfect image right now.
Well, maybe they are, but you're still going to have that agency where they've got the mind and the experience to set you above, right?
And I think the big brands will still use those agencies. I think
Exactly.
it's a more competitive, let's say, frugal private label seller will think that's 99% good enough and it's free. So this is I'll no longer go for a creative agency. I still think there's a space for it. It's just especially, I mean, it's which spectrum of the market you are actually targeting.
Great.
There's an issue of what I've termed, maybe I'm coining an industry term now, but I'm going to call it bulk creative, and bulk creative being necessary for e-commerce, especially on Amazon. You have 1,000 ASINs. Treating that, just 2 years ago was, a very expensive proposition. And obviously, as you put images in and in that magnitude, you also have to maintain them. You have to have an asset management system. You have to have constant review and things like that. And so I think the bulk creative is, something that is easy target, just like the data, I think, is an easy target. You're seeing it happen already now, but just bore you with a quick story from my old days. But the short answer is it's only as good as the prompt, and and that's true of humans too. So I harken back to I'm not going to name the company, but a very large engine manufacturing company that wanted a Christmas card, and they came to an agency I worked with at that time, and they gave us specific things of like, oh, we want to see elves working in a shop, and the shop's powered by the engine, and ho to the employees. It was an internal thing. I had a very long creative brief, right? But in there, it specifically said, do not show the engine vibrating, okay? And do not show the engine, you can't show heat like melted snow. You can't show smoke coming out of it because we're a clean engine, right? So this is all in the creative brief. And everything that came back from that, we had, concepts that came from that Christmas card. How do you show an engine running without it vibrating? How do you show it, it's sitting in a, powering an elf workshop, and it was hilarious because we kept prompting the creative director to come back with, ideas, but you can't show it this way. The client ultimately ended up not using the card because there was no way to solve for that, right? So the reason being is you would have that, you could feed today, literally today, you could feed, especially if you use the 4.5 version of ChatGPT that just came out and solving a lot of the creative issues. I could take that brief from back then, feed it into AI, and its concepts it was pretty detailed. It would probably be dead on in style and all the things and probably would have solved for how do you show an engine running to run an elf workshop in the snow without it smoking, vibrating, and all these other things. So to push back, it's really in the prompt. And I'm learning that myself as I work with it. You might take 3 pages to just prompt the AI, and the results will be that much better.
And so that is where you have Amazon AI engineers. What do you call them? AIs. So, and look, I agree with you. And by the way, if you weren't already aware of this goes for both of you. There is a tool out there called AMZ Design Kit, where it's just tons of acquired brand styles and stuff like that. And with that, you can push, I don't recall exactly how it works, but you can push this stuff to a ton of listings. So you can make a design change and push it to a ton of listings. So right there, we are already at the point where, you can take a template and go, all right, this is what I want, make your changes, push it, right?
Right. And then that would have required a team of, heaven forbid you had full-time employees in the US or, that on a 1099. Back in the day, that's going to take a fleet of work to be done. It would be done by humans. That over the last, since COVID, that's now acceptable to do maybe overseas for cheaper labor. And that's great. But all of that's ultimately going to go to, press a button, and with the right prompts, it will come out.
Well, it's nearly there. I mean, just for clarity, George Barnett Reed is one of the Elevate's partners, so I work quite closely with that.
Okay, yes. So Simon, I didn't have to tell you that.
Of course.
You could have told me that.
I won't go into full kind of sales mode, but yeah, it's a very good piece of kit.
Yeah. All right, let's get on to the next question. We're already at 34 minutes here, so just a bunch of chatty Cathys here talking about AI. All right, so Simon, you touched on this point a little while ago. How will brands react? Are they going to bring this in-house? Simon?
Well, I think there's two sides to the story, isn't it? I think there's brands who are, especially in light of the current financial issues, they're looking to, cut costs wherever possible. So I think there will be a certain portion of the industry that actually does look to in-house this where possible as it becomes more and more attainable, more and more accessible. But it's the bigger brands who are selling multiple millions of pounds per month, who are got too much to lose really to automate this process or bring it in-house. Or they don't actually have the appetite to bring this in-house either. They've got so many other new AI challenges to contend with first. They'd rather an expert in the field who can learn collaboratively for a big team who could speed up the expertise, would manage this process for them. So I think there's two sides of the story. Some will, the smaller, more kind of say challenger brands will look to kind of in-house whatever they can, whereas the big brands will look for someone, an expert, to make sure they are the very pinnacle of what AI should be doing right now.
Cool. Chris,
I mean,
how do you think brands are going to react?
I think, Simon's absolutely correct. One of the things that especially small and medium-sized brands are always looking to agencies for their expertise, and not only things like creative and optimization, things like those lines, but I think they'll be leading like, well, how should we be implementing AI or not? Prompting AI, what should we not be doing? And that as well. So I think, the agencies aren't going to be going away for an internal team at that point. Though I may be pessimistic and push back. If you look at like a Procter and Gamble, who can bring resources to bear that may actually lead in AI and consultants they can hire and programmers and things like that, I could foresee that they may replace the need for outside agencies in that role, that leading role.
Mhm.
There may be some branding aspects and things like that, but none of the best, some of the best branders in the world are within the walls of Procter and Gamble. And so it may be that person or that small team plus AI, the combo is probably going to be solved by Procter and Gamble, and they ultimately will not have any need for outside media companies, influencer companies, agencies, all the creative aspect. I honestly think that they will probably develop their own. Now, do all large brands know what they're going to be doing in that aspect? Absolutely not. But I think some of the bigger ones will ultimately not need to outsource anymore.
Yeah, well, I think that's true to a point. I think, and the CPGs, FMCGs as well, you'll find that internally the stakeholder with managing Amazon didn't particularly want Amazon as a kind of a channel. They're trained in Ocado, doing the big multiples. They're trained in sort of Tesco's. They don't have the training in Amazon, and they find it's actually taking 90% of their time, but generating about 30% of the revenue. So they'd rather, in most instances, outsource this for the time being, at least. I'm guessing that there will come a point where it becomes easier to in-house because of the way things are evolving. But that's currently what I see as being one of the reasons why they'll be happy to kind of leave this with an agency for the time being.
And again, just to be super pessimistic, they may not, for a long while, they might be fighting that off. They may not have the knowledge how to do it. They may not have the employees to do it. But ultimately, they're going to have an AI to do it, to do the work, to learn, to teach, to do the AI, to ultimately put it in place, right? And so, I mean, it's just like this speeding mechanism. That's why I think we're more like 5 years than 10 years, because I think it's just going to build over time. But I'm the pessimistic guy here. So.
Yeah, well, look, I think we're actually all speaking on the same topic. I am more along the present. Simon's 2 years, and Chris, you're 5 years plus. I think that's actually probably the viewpoint of the people that are on here. Is I'm looking at the now. Simon's looking at, well, I think this is where it's going to go in the short term. And Chris, you're going like, well, eventually the sun's going to bake the earth, and we're all going to be dead. So
that's
not quite, but
a billion years. But yeah, wish we had that much time. I wouldn't be here to worry about it. I would not be worried about any of this if that was the time.
No. Hopefully we can elevate by then. There you go, Simon.
It's almost in reach. Boom.
Hey, I have nothing for myself. All right. So last question. That one's going into a short for sure. Last question. And I dare say this is the most important question. How are agencies and companies going to adapt? But I want to expand upon this. Right now, what are they going to do? What do they need to do to adapt?
Simon?
Well, right now it's all about increasing efficiencies. I say there's the bell curve. I mean, this is, as we said at the forefront, was it's a kind of period of prosperity potentially for those who adapt the quickest. So it's all about reducing administrative tasks. We kind of let AI automate some repetitive tasks, identifying issues before. There's one big scare story that most agencies won't like to. An agency never wants a client to tell them something wrong with the listing. They always need.
Exactly why I created Catalog Defender.
Immediately asking to kind of renegotiate terms because it's quite clear everything's been automated.
To plug my own stuff, the moment I've just published a couple reports, one on AI, the other thread of the current economy and things along those lines, and then just a general overview of the industry and where it's going with forecasting over the next 5+ years. And so in there are a number of opportunities. I would suggest everybody to read that. And it was by the way, it was generated in large part with me prompting and my skills and all of my data, but in large part with AI. And the results were actually specific or were very educational to myself as well. And I'm still struggling with what the results were and getting my arms around it as well. So I highly encourage you to read it and please give me feedback as well. But the first thing is, again, I focus on M&A and the value of these agencies and what it takes to really sell. My recommendations are consider that sooner than later for not only AI, but for some economic issues that's coming up or here now as well. But really, one of the things that pulled out was your tech stack. And so your tech stack in large part is going to be AI influenced, again, starting with things like reporting and media placement and some of the things that you see now. Make sure that your tool is leading you and that your tech stack reflects the latest technology and that you choose your partners wisely in that space alone. But again, I get to the soft aspects of things of how to operate your agency most efficiently. What are roles that you can train for with AI? What are roles that you can replicate? Get 1.5 of the work out of the same human effort. So look at that way. And then really into things like just the lower even operating system of your agency. So task management, things like support for clients, some of those things can be automated as well. So in short, your tech stack is probably 10 high, or if it's 15 high right now, it probably starts with things like Slack and communications like that. I would really look for solutions that start to boil that down with a bunch of AI in it, because when an acquirer comes for that agency, they're going to be looking not only for their clients and their employees, but what is that tech stack? What can I, when I grab them, I solve for all these things that are pain points that I know I need to solve for AI. And so, tech has to be baked into your agency. I would focus on that aspect just to make sure you get the most value out of your agency.
Yeah,
Well,
cool.
having read and enjoyed your report, Chris, I thought the other thing that I sort of draw my attention was pricing. You're moving away from an FTE model for a full-time equivalent to something. It's like a sort of full-time equivalent plus tech. And so, how do you price that? And what are clients willing to pay for going forward? So that's going to be
That's how you price it right there.
yeah.
Ask AI. No, how do I price this? Yes. Again, focus on that endpoint. I think it's going to be more performance based ultimately, because what was based on FTE, like I need 4.5 FTEs on this brand for this year. I'm going to do a retainer for that and draw down on that because it's based on humans. And service-based hourly work is going to be more like, hey, what have you done for me lately? And these guys can squeeze another percentage out with their tech. And so there's a number of reasons to solve for AI with agencies. So I would focus forward on that and always be asking, how can I implement this more and more and more?
Yeah, I think it's performance plus objective. I think there'll be short-term projects along with a longer-term performance. So with the 1P, we vendor negotiate, improving terms, improving efficiencies, improving operational processes. So I think there will be different components depending on the brand.
Absolutely.
Yep, agreed. All right, cool. So for everyone that's listened this far, thank you for being here. I'm gonna quote you both, but whoever's listening, you should follow both Simon and Chris on LinkedIn. They both post extremely valuable data and content up there. And I'm going to do a couple of quotes. So, Chris, you said between 2025 and 2030, AI technologies will dramatically streamline campaign management, data analysis, and creative production for Amazon-focused agencies, boosting efficiency. Also, oh, wait. Yeah, boosting efficiency, but also threatening traditional workflows. And conversely, or maybe earlier on the timeline, Simon, I've quoted you at AI isn't here to replace us, it's here to augment us, giving your team more time for strategy, relationships, and results. So I think that no matter what, you're both right. It's just a question of time, right? Nobody in this conversation is wrong. Everybody gets a participation trophy. Congratulations. But no question, this is AI is, I mean, it's been here a long time, a lot longer than most of us realize. Since like the 80s or 90s or something like that is when it really first started. This big
Chatbots, yeah.
Chatbots, but even before that, supercomputers, when, the computing and processing power has been being worked on to process large amounts of data for a very long time. So let's wrap this up. And, I dare say I should have you guys on again to talk about optimizing an agency and preparing for sale and what you need to do. Or maybe that's
In 5 years' time.
Yeah. Let's record a preemptive podcast on what you can do to not be brought down by AI.
Okay.
All right, sweet. Gentlemen, let's see. So Chris, you've got nreach.com. That's reach, the letter N, and then reach.com.
Yes.
Simon, you've got elevate. Is it .org?
No website at the moment. I'm just kind of we're now at the moment. So whatever you were looking at.
Yeah. Okay. Good. That's not the actual representation of Simon's. So LinkedIn is probably the best place for you then. Okay. Awesome. Well, gents, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Yeah, absolutely, a pleasure. Is there one last thing? Is there any particular tool set that you recommend that agencies jump on now? I'll start with you, Chris.
There's a company, and I don't pretend to understand or to have followed all of the tech in this space, but one of the things
Possible
from this conversation that I think I'm focused on the operations side of agencies. I think the stuff on top of that's going to be affected first, but ultimately it's going to be what do these agencies look like and how do they operate? And so there's a company called SimplyWorks, SIMPLIWORKS.
Yeah, they're a client of mine. That's Malik.
Yeah, Malik, who I shout out to Malik. He's one of the people that have opened my eyes and sat down with it at length at Prosper. What they are focused on really is the Amazon agency OS. Okay, there's a tool called Workamajig that's out in the larger space that started out in the 2000s, was a SaaS solution that a lot of small agencies. It's now ubiquitous in that space. That said, it's the similar approach where all aspects of task management, billing, but again, doing things. And then it also has the hooks into Amazon as well. And so when you start to see how do I start to replace humans, I think that's SimplyWorks is one of the things that the players that's actually tackling those aspects.
Brilliant. Yeah, but Malik is absolutely brilliant. You can see it when you look in his eyes too. All right.
He owes me. He owes us a shout out for that. But yes.
All right. Yeah, exactly. Simon, what any tools or tool sets you suggest?
There's a big rush at the moment to be first to market with lots of tools, and I think that's not always going to be the best thing. It's usually first followers that kind of actually embrace the opportunity. But the one tool I do quite like at the moment is Product Pinion. I haven't had a huge amount of time to use it, but embracing AI in the right way. So that's something I'd probably flag.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, that's a very good tool. So that's Matt and Andre. So, yep, awesome. So, guys, thank you. This has been really awesome, and I follow you on LinkedIn, so I'll see you there.
Please do.
Yeah.
All right, gents. Thanks for being on.
Thank you.
Cheers.
See ya.